in particular. Let's turn now to where modern social science comes from. And I say modern because if you think about certain statements in, for instance, Aristotle's or Plato's work, they can obviously be considered as precursors of political science in particular, but also sociology. But when I say modern science, I also refer to, let's say, more organized disciplines that have a certain, let's say, undergraduate curriculum that are organized in professional disciplines around journals, books, etc. And in this modern sense, the origins of social science have very different names, in fact, and it depends a little bit on the country what the name is under which social science then figured. In the British concept, moral sciences were important, but also in the French, sciences morales et politiques. These are, by the way, often the titles also of academic books and volumes. For the British and US context, the making of the modern world is an important database that contains many of these works. Many of the French works are archived also in digitized format in the French National Library, gallica.fr. And yeah, in the German context, one of the crucial terms was also Geisteswissenschaften, so the humanities, national economy. That was actually the denomination of Max Weber's chair, and earlier also Cameralism. So all of these headings had in common that the writers were not necessarily pure academics, right? They were often public servants, they were consultants of, let's say, the rulers of the time, not necessarily democratically elected rulers. And their writings were a mixture of very diverse disciplines, we would say nowadays, mainly coming from a broad notion of philosophy, also practical philosophy, which at the time contained any kind of writings that touched upon populations, economies, state bodies, minds, customs. Think about Thomas Hobbes' work, for instance, or other political philosophers of the time. This is also at a time when modern statistics wasn't born. So the writings are, let's say, relatively essayistic, we would say. Yeah, they were informed also by the idea to consult mercantilist rulers in how to improve the state of the economy or the state of populations. So, for instance, increase the number of populations or the quality through education. Just to give you a little idea of how then the notions of our current social sciences, including economics, here developed, I made use of the Google English book corpus here, which you easily find online as the Google Ngram viewer, which searches in what Google calls a lot of books, and reports then here the relative frequencies reported as percentage terms on the y-axis. A lot of books means we don't exactly know which selection criteria Google used to compose this corpus of books, which is why generally I would not take this kind of graph as a very hard evidence, but as, let's say, a first glimpse into the history of a concept. So this cannot replace a more thorough kind of investigation. And I will show you in a little bit how to refine a frequency-based analysis a little bit more. But what emerges from this graph is that the late 19th century was the time period when these disciplines in the social sciences, under the names as we know them today, emerged. You see psychology here emerging first. In the 1880s, already Wundt in Germany received the first chair for experimental psychology. Economics emerged then perhaps as the other big science, but still many different notions of economics, at least until the 1930s, when economics eventually standardized its discipline. It became mathematical in orientation. Okay, and then we have sociology. So round about late 19th century, when in the United States, it's at least the first chair for sociology in Chicago was founded, 1905, the foundation of the American Sociological Association that exists up to the current day, 1909 in Germany. Yeah, and to have a complete picture, also political science and anthropology emerging a little bit later, at least under these names. So why did sociology emerge in the first place? So before the emergence of sociology, social sciences under different names already undertook, let's say, similar work. And I think one of the first to mention here is the demographic tradition, with actually Protestant pastors such as Johann Peter Süßmilch, for instance, writing about the state of demographic affairs based on the statistics they found in their local parishes. So Süßmilch, for instance, observed certain associations between the times of death in his parishes, the times of birth and marriages, so things that were recorded religiously at the time, and wrote a 2-volume book then about how God had not only created laws for the world of natural things, but also laws of society. So in a way, you could say that these early demographers were nomological theologists at the time. So interpreting regularities in the social sciences as a realization of God's laws. Incidentally, the statistics gathered also produced actually the first mortality tables important for life insurances. In France and Belgium, the Belgian economist Adolphe Quetelet was one of the precursors also of modern statistics, who invented also something like the average man, as it was called at the time. So artificial statistical construct used to describe societies by just computing means. And he wrote about crime rates, marriages, thefts, suicides, and tried to associate a little bit everything with everything, also with the idea to discover laws in the social sciences. So in the British context, political arithmetics was also an important discipline. So here are a couple of the preconditions for the modern social science to emerge. One very important one is that there was a transition from, let's say, more traditionally stratified societies, with 3 layers, the worldly rulers, the clerics, and then this large layer, which included both then bourgeois and proletarians, farmers, etc., into a more differentiated kind of society. With many, let's say, new subfields of like specialization, division of labor, etc., which then also changed the relationship between the economy and the state. where suddenly the state was also governed just by general economic laws. So the emergence of free market societies was probably also important for the emergence of the social sciences. Then many of these early political arithmeticists, they were also, in a way, translating their knowledge of physical laws they used in order to predict planetary movements to describe earthly matters. So it's not a coincidence that, theologists like Süßmilch, or then also the political arithmetics in the British concepts, came from, both, let's say, beyond earthly perspective, but then thought to implement this kind of framework also to describe regularities on Earth. Yet another precondition is the turn from a normative to a positive understanding of laws, where the traditional idea was to, as Süßmilch, consider laws in societies as God-given and beyond justification on Earth. But once you think that laws that are implemented by perhaps even elected governments can be changed and have to be justified, then it also makes sense to look a little bit into the workings of these laws, whether they do what they are supposed to do, etc., or whether they do not correspond to certain regularities in societies. And this is, if you want, a political birth of the modern social sciences to look into these matters. Last but not least, a clear political background for modern social science to emerge is then the context of the French Revolution, where just this thinking about what the best empirical order should be was suddenly opened and at stake. So I think in this sense, there's a clear correlation between the development of democracies and the development of the social sciences, which I should add, can even go the reverse way, right? So Karl Marx, we will learn this, emigrated first to France, Belgium, the United Kingdom, because he was pursued by autocratic governments of his time. And we live in a time nowadays where the labor market for many economists, social scientists in general, shrinks because of a backlash towards more or autocratic regimes. In this, let's say, long 19th century, it's interesting to distinguish different schools of thought about how sociology should be conceptualized. And it is also interesting to note how many of these disciplinary, let's say, imaginations still play a role for informing different schools of thoughts about sociology nowadays. So let's start with one that was perhaps chronologically among the first, which is to use the natural sciences, and that was first physics. So in a way, is social physics, then biology in the later 19th century, and to apply this model to the social sciences as well, for sociology, then also psychology, where it probably worked out best. So the, let's say, popularizer of the term sociology, Auguste Comte, was actually a defender of this view when he considered sociology as a kind of social physics. Herbert Spencer, whom we'll learn about more, also saw sociology as a way of doing social physics. And it is interesting to note that the economics even of today was born as a mirror image of the physics equilibrium-based modeling of their day. And Philip Mirowski is a sociologist who has